All right, so I believe we have everybody online. So good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to introduce to you to our Meet the Editors of the Trends. So today is a special Meet the Editors seminar series where we're going to have like the editors of trends in biotechnology, trends in cancer, trends in microbiology. We're very lucky to have Matthew, Daniel, and Shankar here to share their perspectives about how it is to be an editor in a review specialized journal. And we will learn a lot of new topics here that I'm particularly interested in, such as the how to be a reviewer of reviews and how to communicate the science to a broad audience, and career prospects as a trends editor too. So this seminar is recorded. The first hour will be a workshop with the three of the editors. And the second hour, like I have like selected people that express the interest, catch up with them. So stay in the line for who is going to stay for the speed dating event. So before I pass.
Yeah, it had the same issue yesterday, and they sort of unlocked it remotely.
So I will send I will share an acknowledgement of the country. So the University of Queensland acknowledges the traditional owners of their custodians in which the land we meet. We pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants, who continue to culturally and spiritually connections to the country, and we recognize their values contributions to the Australian and global society. And now I'm very, very pleased to send the word and ask for Matthew to start the workshop. Thank you, everyone, and we look forward for your presentations.
All right, thank you very much, Fernando. And can everybody see this?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So as Fernando said, I'm the editor of Trends in Biotechnology. My name is Matt Pavlovich, and I'm going to be talking today about how to review a review article. I was saying before we got started today that there's a lot of information out there, and most of it's quite good about how to write a review. And there's a lot of good information about how to review a research article. But I think a real blind spot in scientific publication and training is how to review reviews. This is actually mostly taken from a webinar that I gave on the same topic a couple of years ago with Elsevier's Researcher Academy, but I think the content remains useful and timely, and I hope that you find that too. So here's me. You can feel free to get in touch with me on email or Twitter after this if you have any specific questions. That's totally fine. So to get into this, as you probably know, there are some important differences between research and review articles. In reviews in particular, we're not dealing with data or methods unless it's what's called a meta-analysis or a systematic review. These are different flavors of review articles. What we're looking to do is evaluate a broad sample of the literature and do it fairly and do it without bias. When you have a review, you're usually expecting it to be read by a broad audience. We like to think of our reviews and trends as being used as teaching tools, or maybe if you're a new researcher and you join a lab on the topic, they might hand you a review article to read. And the novelty of what we're doing in a review is not really in discovery or creation or invention as much as it is having something new to say. So it's your opinion or perspective that we're most interested in. In some cases, including in the trends journals, reviews are only submitted after the editor invites you or after you discuss this with an editor. Other journals do allow you to submit reviews sort of de novo, or just log into the website, upload your review to the submission portal, and you're ready to go. But for the trends journals and for some other reviews journals, we're really looking for that prior consultation before we take on a new review. There's some really big picture similarities and differences with what you might be familiar with, especially if you have reviewed a research article before. The first one I really want to mention is be professional, be objective. We recently had a colleague of ours in Trends in Cognitive Science publish an article about neutral language in peer review. So these are things, you're not talking about your disappointment or your expectations. You're just giving a fair and an accurate and hopefully a non-emotional critique of the article. You want to understand what the journal is looking for, but you really don't need to copy edit or be the formatting police. Sometimes as an editor of a reviews journal, I get this long list of, oh, they should add a comma here and they should change this word there. You don't really need to do that. That's not necessarily what we're asking you to spend your valuable time on. As with any research article, talk to the editor, be forthcoming about delays, unexpected difficulties, and remember that your task is to help improve the manuscript. I'm not asking you for your opinion about why the manuscript shouldn't get published. I'm asking you for how the authors can make it better. But there are some important differences. So with any research article, you want to communicate well, you want your writing to be accessible to a broad audience, but that is probably the single most important thing for a review. Again, no methodology, and novelty is in the discussion rather than the results. I want to emphasize that it's important for an author to distinguish consensus from their opinion. So what is widely believed or widely accepted in the field versus what new perspective is the author trying to advance. And we really emphasize timeliness as well. So is this a topic that the field cares about right now? And does there need to be a new review on it? So who might be invited to do this? Really, it's anyone who might submit to the same journal. So if you have some research experience in the topic, if an author has cited your work in their review, I might invite you to review it. I do take author recommendations into account. There's all sorts of kind of superstition and lab lore around this. I like to use suggested reviewers. Some editors feel differently. There are some situations and some conflicts where I wouldn't do that. And I promise, I never invite an opposed reviewer, but I have had colleagues say that people have asked them to exclude entire universities or countries worth of researchers, and that's usually not something that we can feasibly do. Postdocs, early career researchers can be really excellent at this because they have the perspective, but they're still pretty close to the literature. And if you're a more established researcher, if you're a full professor or something, I think it's totally appropriate to include your trainees, but as a matter of professional courtesy, it's important to let the editor know that you've done that. We talk a lot about the conflicts of interest, and that comes up all the time in talking about peer review. I will catch most of them. So if you, for instance, have published a lot with the author of a paper in the last several years, I'll notice that and then not invite you. If you're current collaborators, if you're working in the same department, I would consider this a conflict and not invite you to review a review. If you've had a few co-publications in the past, especially if they're on these like really long, many author lists or position papers or something, it's probably not a conflict. If you've previously collaborated in the past, or you were a visiting scholar in each other's labs a long time ago, I'm fine with that. And then other professional activities, probably not a conflict either, but I can miss some. If you just started a new collaborator or a new collaboration and you haven't published together yet, I might not know about that. And so I might inadvertently ask you to review your new collaborator's review article. I'm sorry, I don't know. And I wish I hadn't done that, but that's just a mistake that we can easily make. Personal friendship or a long ago trainee mentor relationship. So if you did a very brief postdoc in someone's lab and you hadn't published with them for 15 years, I might not catch that and I might inadvertently ask you to review that. And so these are things that we just ask you to be forthcoming about. I might not know about them, or I might have them in my mind, but not catch it at the time of the invitation. So just be aware of this. Now, you as researchers are busy. You have a lot going on. You have your research work to do. You have your own papers to write. You have mentorship. You have training. You have, if you're a student, you have classes to take and so on. So why should you accept that invitation to review a review article? I think it can be even tougher than for research articles, because if you're not currently writing a review, you might not be in that sort of buy-in payout mindset. However, reviews are short, they're easy to read. We really think this is not going to take much of your time. Again, there's no statistics to dig into. There's no brutal assessment of novelty against previously published research. We really sincerely think that this is not going to be a big commitment for you. You might learn something. The things I publish, and I think that my colleagues do too, are highly multidisciplinary. No person is usually an expert in the scope of the whole thing. And so maybe I invite you to give your perspective on the thing that you're an expert in, but you might read the rest of it and actually learn something yourself. I think it's a great way to build relationships. So if I invite you to review a paper and then you give me really insightful, constructive comments that are well written, and reflect a knowledge of the field, then I might later invite you to write for me, or we might be able to work together on some project in the future. And finally, you can have a say in developing a consensus. So remember that these things are going to be read broadly. They might be used as teaching aids or to introduce new researchers. You can help the author frame your field in a way that you think best represents it. If you don't think you can do it, we get it. We know you're busy. You have time conflicts, you have travel. I've had people I've invited, they're like, oh no, I'm on maternity leave. Obviously go take care of your baby. You know, I understand that. One time I had a guy say that a tree fell on his house. Obviously go clean up your house. I can find somebody else. This isn't the end of the world. You have personal lives. I try to respect that. So it's okay to decline. I do appreciate if you give me a short reason. We don't need the whole story. We don't need to know about the tree necessarily. If you tell us that you're willing to review in the future, that's really great, because then I know if I should contact you next time or if I should just find someone else. And we really, really love it if you're able to suggest one or two alternatives. But if you don't respond, I can't be sure that you received the invitation. So the worst case is that somebody says yes, they can review, and then time goes by, you know, weeks turn into months and they never submit their comments. And at that point, I could have been searching for more reviewers. The author's getting frustrated. I'm getting frustrated. It's really better off for everyone if people can be forthcoming at the start of the invitation. Again, none of this is really unique to review articles. I think it's just best practices and courtesy for being any kind of peer reviewer. Okay, so let's say that you get the invitation and you're convinced and you think, yes, I really do want to review this review article. My house is intact. I have no children to take care of right now. What should you comment on? I've listed 3 major points here: accuracy or inaccuracy, duplication, and confusion. So scientific accuracy is the most important reason that I invited you. I've listed some things here of what I mean by accuracy. So are the concepts explained correctly? Is the terminology consistent? Does it reflect the current consensus in the field? Does it cite the important research? And by that, I mean both foundational papers and the sort of new things that have changed how the field is perceived. Does the review faithfully reproduce the data from the papers that it cites? This is something that I wouldn't necessarily know because I'm not an expert in this narrow field of literature, but you are. Does the manuscript cite any disputed or discredited studies? Maybe there's something out there that got retracted, but the review is trying to pitch it as actually what the field still understands. That's something that you are in a better position to catch than I am. I'll come back to this point of author hypothesis versus prevailing opinion versus undisputed fact. Sometimes reviews can accidentally be written in a way that confuses these things. And so a non-expert can come away not understanding what the author believes versus what the field at large believes. And to sum up all that into one question, would a non-expert reader come away with the correct understanding of this topic by reading this manuscript? We also want to focus on novelty. So duplication, distinction. Does the manuscript maybe consider the topic from a different angle, or are they interpreting the same body of literature differently? Are they writing for a different audience? The simple fact that there's another review on the same topic doesn't exclude something from publication, but we want to make sure that we're doing something new. There's some actual reason to get this in the literature. And finally, is the main message clear? Can you tell what the authors are trying to say? They don't have to have perfect grammar or usage. They don't need to be gifted writers of prose, but they do need to be making a statement that you can get. And finally, are the authors saying anything at all or just regurgitating results? So one of my least favorite kinds of review articles is one that just lists a bunch of experimental results. You know, it's full of numbers, it's full of reproduced methods sections, and that's not saying something new. That's just listing what other papers have already done. We want you to go a step further. Some minor points. You know, you can look at the paper's structure, how the things are discussed. Sometimes the authors have like a favorite publication, or sometimes they have their own results and they take up a lot of the review talking about them. So you want to make sure that the things that the authors discuss are explained in proportion with their importance. Again, look at the level of detail. You don't really need to talk about experimental processes, but if there is a central conclusion from a paper, the review ought to mention that. Maybe there's something that's been published very recently, perhaps even in the time between the review was written and when you're reading it. If there's something new that's been published and the authors didn't catch it, feel free to point that out. And it's okay if you have some work that you think the authors need to cite, but I just advise you to use common sense and humility in that case. You might want to comment on the organization. Is there a reason the text is structured the way it is? Might the authors want to use tables rather than listing a bunch of numbers in the text? Can the figures be improved? So I think reviewers do a pretty good job on this. Do you want to actually reproduce all the bar graphs from the research articles you're citing? Probably not. Can you instead abstract that into some sort of schematic or some sort of diagram? Can you read all the labels and so on? Talked about this already, but don't worry about punctuation, formatting, or grammar. I know the journal's formatting requirements, so just like you know the science in your field, I know what the papers in my journal are supposed to look like. I got this exact comment once that the manuscript is 3,628 words. I can do the word count too. But what I'm asking you to comment on is things like, oh, the historical perspective doesn't add much insight. The story is already well known. We can move on from that. The authors are better served talking about something else. One thing I do want to point out is that in most journals, review articles are copy edited and typeset, which means that things like grammar errors get fixed, punctuation gets standardized, references are formatted in the correct way per journal style. So that's not something you need to worry about. Again, your time is valuable. If you really, really want to, you can. If you like copy editing and want to send a list of missing commas and misspelled words, I'm not going to stop you, but that's also not the most central thing of what we want you to do. Be aware that not every review is the same. So what level of referencing rigor is correct? Sometimes you have a very short perspective piece that might not need references at all. The trends journals that we work on should comprehensively include recent stuff. So we usually say the last 2 to 5 years, but they don't need to cite every paper ever published. Some review styles, on the other hand, should be exhaustive. So if you're writing like an annual reviews and it's got 500 references, that's a very different style of paper than what we ask at Trends. And so just be aware of what the journal you're reviewing for is looking for. Similarly, we really like author perspectives on the field, but some journals expect their reviews to be a more neutral summary. Sometimes there's strict word limits or reference limits or figure limits, and you might want the authors to expand the review, but they just can't do it within the constraints of the journal. Sometimes review articles are open to original data. We're usually not. Sometimes journals like meta-analysis or encourage it or are okay with it. We usually don't. So again, if there's any question, understand what the journal is looking for and feel free to ask the editor, is this appropriate for your journal? How do you actually structure your comments? How do you do it? So again, you want to help the authors improve their review and you want to tell the editor whether this is worth publishing. I'll say it again, be nice, use professional courtesy, do unto the authors as you'd have them do to you. You might want to start by writing a summary of the manuscript. You don't have to. I think I like it when your first paragraph or first paragraphs explain what you see as the review's strengths and weaknesses, if there are any major ones, along with a recommendation of we should publish this as it is, or it needs work, or we really shouldn't publish it at all. And then you can do major and minor concerns, either sort of chronologically through the manuscript or in the order of you perceive their importance. Make sure your comments are consistent with the recommendation. This sounds like it should be common sense. Sometimes I get something that says, reject the manuscript, but then there's only like 3 lines and say, oh, this is a good review, and here are some minor changes the authors can make. That doesn't help me. That confuses me. How do you recommend? So I like to say, think of an average researcher who's interested in the topic, but not an expert in the specific field of the paper. Can this person understand the review? Will she get an accurate and current representation of the topic? And will she learn some things from this review that she wouldn't just learn by reading all the articles it cites? The specific recommendation terms, so when you're doing the peer review, you have a little drop-down menu or the radio buttons, and you have to pick what you're going to recommend to the editor. Those terms vary journal to journal. In trends, we have minor, major revisions along with accept and reject. And so I think to accept, you'd want to meet those criteria in my first bullet point as is. The more the manuscript deviates from the criteria, the more revision is necessary. And if you think the thing is so deeply flawed that it's just never going to get there, then you can recommend reject. Straight up accept on a first submission is very rare. I imagine it's the same at most journals. Rejection is pretty rare too at trends. We like to give authors second and sometimes third chances to really get their manuscript to shine rather than saying we're not going to publish it. And finally, consider whether re-review is necessary. A lot of research articles do get re-reviewed, but I would say it's relatively uncommon, not rare, not that we never do it, but we certainly don't do it for every manuscript at trends. If your comments are along the lines of clarify this, add some more references, polish this figure, you probably don't need to see it again. And we're not going to ask you to take your time to look at it again. So what happens after that? I get this question all the time of how many reviews do you need? Usually more than one and usually not more than 3, but sometimes it varies. If I get 2 reviews and they're both thorough and they're both thoughtful and they both give consistent recommendations, that might be enough. If there's more significant variability, I might look for 3. Then the authors revise. When the authors submit their revised manuscript, I'll determine whether re-review and re-revision are necessary. This might happen if multiple reviewers requested re-review or if the revisions are super technical and I just don't have the that scientific expertise to know if they've done it correctly. And then ultimately, I'll accept it or reject it, just with any research article. We usually don't do like revision 2, revision 3 at trends. It's usually, you know, 1 major or minor revision, perhaps a second minor revision, and that's about it. So to sum up, here's 10 do's and don'ts to keep in mind. Number 1, I've already said this 3 times. I'll say it again, be professional, be constructive. And if you're writing a comment on someone else's paper, use language that you wouldn't be offended to read in comments about your own paper. If you're a more senior researcher, do invite your trainees to contribute, as long as you inform the editor. Inform the editor of any potential conflicts of interest, especially those ones that I mentioned that we might not be able to catch. If you know you can't meet the deadline, don't commit to reviewing it, but do inform the editor if there's an unexpected delay in your comments. And I didn't put this on the slide, but I do want to add that if I ask you to do the review in the next 10 days and you can't do that, but you can do it in the next 15 days, just tell me that and I'll probably say that's okay. Pay particular attention to scientific accuracy. That's the thing that I really want your comments on the most. Also timeliness, clarity, accessibility, and novelty. Don't feel compelled to do the copy editing or the line edits as we call them. If you can't commit to reviewing the revised manuscript, don't recommend re-review. And as always, do ask the editor if something isn't clear or if you need guidance. It is literally our job to help you. I would much rather get an email from a reviewer asking for some help rather than an unexpected delay or a set of comments that's not that useful for me. Thank you very much. I realized that was a pretty quick whirlwind of it. I tried to get that in maybe not too much over 20 minutes. But I hope you've appreciated that and I hope that you learned something.
This was great, Matthew. This is really, really great. So I do have like many questions, but I will restrict for a few, and I'll also. Would you like us to give you a few questions now, or at the end of the workshop? What would you prefer?
Maybe we'll do some questions at the end. I think we discussed that, right?
Okay. Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah, no worries. That might flow better if the time was on. But that was great, Matthew. Thank you very much. So I believe Shankar, would you like to be the next to contribute?
Yep. Just going to share my screen. Just 1 minute. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So I'm going to be talking about how to communicate your science to a broad audience. And much of what I'm going to be talking about will be from the perspective of trends reviews and trends opinions and trends article types. So there's going to be definite overlap with what Matt has been talking about in terms of what a review should comprise of in his introductory slides before he moved on to peer review. So just to quickly introduce, I am Shankar. I'm the editor for Trends in Microbiology. I'm currently located in Amsterdam, and it's 1:30 in the morning, so that's pretty fun. And I've been the editor for Trends in Microbiology since last year, June. And yeah, so if you want to reach out, then obviously feel free to send me a message, and also the journal's Twitter handle is right there in case you want to get in touch. All right, so with that, so the trends journals basically are reviews only journals, but in addition to reviews, we also publish different article types like opinions, forums, spotlight, scientific life, Science and Society. We provide a range of options, and one of the main advantages of trends journals is that they actually provide a platform for active debate, active discussion, and hopefully, and the hope is that the information is in an easy to understand and easy to follow manner. So with that in mind, what exactly do we mean when we say that an article should be accessible to a broad audience? What exactly could you keep in mind? So the first one here is that choose the type of article you want to write. For example, if you think that if there's very little known in a particular field and there's not many developments, it might not be particularly useful to write an opinion piece, because we do want a lot of your perspectives to be based on findings and to be supported by recent findings rather than just complete speculations. So it might be worthwhile to just sit down for a minute and think about what type of article you want to write. So if you basically want to just talk about 2 or 3 recent developments, and you might consider asking us what kind of articles we have, and not necessarily spend a lot of time writing a full-fledged opinion or a review. Now that once you have that sorted, then try and identify your audience. So for instance, if you're writing an article about, let's say, microbiome heritability, then your audience is not going to be just comprised of pure microbiologists, but also geneticists. So if it is at the intersection of these 2 areas, then I think it'll be good for you to think about how you can make your article accessible to non-specialists in both of these fields, and not just in a particular field or a particular subfield. So trying to identify your audience would really help you in understanding what exactly you should be focusing on, introducing, what concepts you should be discussing, where you should be beginning. I repeat this, and if your manuscript is one that obviously spans different domains, then resist the urge to tackle all of this and do the extensive research by yourself, and obviously have a multidisciplinary team as much as possible. And as Matt mentioned before, the trends articles are predominantly interdisciplinary, and the author teams are, that is very evident from the other teams that actually write the reviews and opinions and other article types for us. So obviously, if it is one that spans different domains, and resist the urge to tackle these domains by yourself. This is something that I sometimes think about quite a lot as well when I used to write articles back in the day. So title, this catchiness is helpful, is more helpful than title, this catchiness is catchy. And that's literally the reason that we have this catchy title. So a lot of people do prefer catchy titles, and that's great. That's not a bad thing. But then if the catchiness is basically not giving you any inkling, any idea as to what is actually coming in and what you're going to be reading and what the article is going to be about, then it just remains vague. So I would suggest not to get too bogged down by the catchiness of the title as much. I mean, I understand that all of us have our favorite movies, our favorite TV shows, our favorite characters that we would desperately want to include in our reviews and opinions as much as we could. But obviously, if it works well with the information, then great. But obviously, resist the urge to do it just because it's catchy, because sometimes it might just come across as vague. You have been writing, you have been researching your field for years, decades, for instance. So while certain details might seem too trivial to you, who is in the field, to be properly introduced, please know that we would always like you. I mean, a good article that is accessible to a broad audience reaches that by you putting yourself always in the shoes of the readers and trying to understand how I could actually make this more accessible, how I can actually introduce these concepts. Obviously, you don't have to go all the way down to introducing polymerase chain reactions, let's say, but obviously to think about, to take yourself out of the fields that you've been part of, which I understand is a big ask, and try to think of details that that you could potentially introduce, even if you think it's too trivial. And this is one of the biggest things about writing an article. So you have to ensure that the rationale behind the article is something that you have in mind for every single section. So if you, a good article is basically one where the next section easily flows into the other section, and so on and so forth. And one of the best ways for you to do that is to keep asking yourself, why am I talking about this particular finding? And what is the context here? That will also help you in making sure that you're not just merely listing different developments, and you're actually discussing actively the rationale behind why you're discussing these findings and why you're discussing these developments. Because without the rationale, if you're listing 3 different findings and you move on to the next paragraph, then I don't know what you want me to take home from those findings. And I might not remember those findings, but if you have a message that is tying in with the rationale, then I'll be able to follow your train of thought a lot better. And I will, by the time you get to concluding sections, I will hopefully be in the same page, thanks to all the messages that you've actually given me in the previous few sections. So ensuring that the rationale behind the article flows through each section is something that I would definitely consider to be a very important part of how to make it accessible. And spend some time talking about what you are actually bringing. So if you think there are other things that have been talked about in the area, acknowledge those things. That's completely okay, because when you acknowledge them, then I know that there are other material that's been published, but at the same time, I would also know that you are planning on putting forth something unique and different in this article that you're actually writing. At the same time, while you're putting your perspective, it might be tempting to basically talk about your perspective as if it's the gold standard, which obviously does hamper accessibility in a way, because your article would be read by a vast range of readers. And one way to basically make sure that this is accessible is to ensure that you're looking at multiple angles to the perspective that you're proposing, and that means not necessarily considering always that your perspective is the gold standard. I'm going to be this is a very quick example of an article that was published early this year. And the authors were essentially talking about a control of synthetic microbial consortia in time, space, and composition. But the reason I brought this up is because they talk about models, but because it's something that, because they are proposing a model at the end of it, they would, one of the unique strengths of this piece is that it also discusses the limitations of the model and considers different angles when it actually is proposing the model, and is putting forth ways to take it forward, which is which provides much more of a better platform of discussion, rather than you just basically putting your perspective and leaving it as the gold standard. So this would basically drive the conversation forward if you do consider various angles, limitations, etc. Yes, so when discussing limitations of certain studies or techniques, and it would definitely be helpful if you not just discuss the limitations and state them, but you actually actively think of ways in which you could take it forward, and you can take the discussions and the conversations forward in the context of the field in which you're discussing them in. Obviously, this has been happening a lot during the pandemic. People have this gigantic urge to connect a lot of things to COVID-19 because it is trending. Obviously, it's such an important topic which has to be considered and looked at from different angles. But at the same time, if your connections might appear as very, very tenuous, and that might actually hamper readability if you are connecting it to something that you think might help you in increasing the citations of your paper, just because you think that it is something that is trending at the moment in the scientific literature. So obviously, this is to do that. You are writing something that you've been working on for a while, because of the fact that you do think that you could put a unique perspective. You do want to communicate something that is fresh from based on your expertise. So obviously avoid the, I would suggest resisting the urge to connect your article to something merely because it's trending. Images are an integral part of accessibility. So the age-old adage of, they do speak, their images can basically be composed of 1,000 words if you think about it in that way. So obviously use schematics in a very, very succinct manner. So the schematics should be essentially complementing the main text, and they should provide a roadmap to understanding the discussions that are made in the main text. So if you are merely listing all of the information presented in the main text, but in the form of figures, then it's not going to add much, but it would also help your readers to understand what exactly is the figure doing and how exactly is the figure helping me in understanding, and not just merely reproducing what has been mentioned in the main text, but it's helping me understand what exactly is present in the main text. And if there are dividers and sections within the figure, then obviously ensure that these are placed in a very logical manner, because we do tend to look at figures and immediately try to find order in some way. So if there's no clear order, then obviously we try to make a sense of what is happening, and that might be sometimes different than what you are intending for the readers to understand. So it might be good to ensure that these are presented in an easy to follow manner and order. So if there are multiple schematics that are already present in previous publications, and if yours is just going to be the exact same thing and adding one to the mix, then consider having a discussion instead of presenting a whole new schematic and reinventing the wheel. Obviously, we have a lot of features with our articles as to other journals. So obviously, use all of these features as much as possible. So we have something called highlights which would hopefully be a hook to get readers to understand what would be discussed in the manuscript in a very succinct manner, and to provide a very quick rationale also in that section. And we also have a section called outstanding questions, where we expect the authors to talk about the big questions in the field that would further understanding. But a lot of authors tend to be philosophical in this section, and obviously try to avoid that, because if you are too generic, then chances are that the people who have been working in the exact same field have thought of those exact same generic questions. Instead, try to be really specific and try to actually ask what exactly is going to drive the particular concept you're proposing in the overall picture forward. And use text boxes, because if you think that if you think further information would be necessary, but you don't have the bandwidth to explain it, and if it's actually interrupting the flow of the manuscript, then put that in a text box and explain that separately. And that way you can actually just code the text, use the text box to explain the discussions that you want to present forward. This was another interesting example from early this year, where many different concepts such as immune imprinting and path-dependent cohort effects were basically introduced in this article in the context of influenza. And obviously, it is impossible for you for one to introduce all of these concepts across the board within the manuscript and talk about discussions. It's impossible to do that without interrupting the logical flow. And this is one of those examples where clear text boxes with different concepts that are introduced, connecting them to the main picture in the text would be absolutely beneficial. And obviously, last but not the least, you might also consider, I would definitely recommend spreading the message widely in an easy to understand manner. Once your article is online, use Twitter threads. I've been seeing a lot of Instagram stories, especially right now during the pandemic, where people have been trying to explain their preprints and manuscripts in the form of very, very succinct stories with easy to understand graphical abstracts in social media. And obviously, this is a forum which you have your data, you have your manuscript published now. To make it more accessible, obviously this is something that you could consider, having these presented in an easy to understand story or a thread or a post or through press releases. And obviously talk with us. We would definitely help you on this. We would also share information for you. Email us and send us your Twitter threads. If you have an article that you published with us, we would be more than happy to include you in the post that we basically share. And that would also be something that would help your research and your article reach a much broader audience. So these are just some of the few concepts that you could essentially consider to make it more accessible to a broad audience. Obviously, people think of all of these concepts differently. There's no you do the first five, you don't do the last five. Obviously, a mix is something that would depend on you. If you find that a catchy title definitely works within the context of whatever you're trying to discuss, excellent, that's perfect. You don't have to necessarily get bogged down about the fact that I said don't focus too much on the catchiness. Obviously, people function very differently. So what is accessible to a broad audience would also depend on how you would want to make it accessible, because at the end of the day, you know the field as well. But talk to us. We're also, again, here to make sure that your article reaches as broad an audience as possible. We would help. We would do whatever we can in disseminating information. And like Matt said at the very last point that he included, talk with the editors, and we're very happy to give you any further information that you would require. And thank you very much.
Okay, should I just share my screen, Fernando?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Chantal.
Okay.
Thank you, Danielle.
Are we good?
Yep, all good.
Perfect. Okay. So I just want to first thank everyone for joining us today, and for Fernando for inviting us to talk. I am Danielle. I am the editor for Trends in Cancer. Just a little background. I was formerly the editor of Trends in Cell Biology from 2013 until 2020, where I took over being the editor for Trends in Cancer. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit from what Matt and Shankar were discussing and talk to you a little bit about the life as a scientific editor, specifically focused on review editing, and how I got here, and some tips for you to apply to become a scientific editor as well. Is it not? Why is it not progressing? Is it progressing for anybody?
No, we're still in the first slide.
Okay, I might have to just do this manually. Sorry about that, everyone.
Yep.
Okay, so for me, I had the plan that probably many of you in graduate school have, where I was going to get my PhD, I was going to do a postdoc, and I was going to become a professor. And then about a year into my postdoc, I realized that I actually don't enjoy being at the bench anymore. But my favorite part of the day was actually evaluating studies and helping my colleagues to communicate their studies and create a story that could be used for publication. So around 2 years into my postdoc, I decided to finally take the step to look for careers outside of academia, which about 10 years ago was very scary because there was no instruction for where to look and no guidance when you're in academia to look for careers outside of academia. But I just want to say and put a plug in that a career outside of academia is just one choice in a plethora of careers for PhDs. There are a number of potential career paths that you can take with your PhD that are in academia is just one of them. And I will be talking to you about another one, which is publishing. So when I was thinking about jobs to pursue, I took a deep look at what it was about science that I liked, what it was about my PhD and my postdoc life that I enjoyed, and what it was that I didn't like. And for me, the best part of my day was sitting down, being able to read the literature. I absolutely enjoyed getting e-talks in my email about the new and latest studies that came out. I enjoyed identifying gaps in the stories that came out and thinking about what the next steps could potentially be if I was that author. So basically, if my job could be journal club, I would be delighted every day. So I really needed to find a job that mimicked journal club. So while I was a postdoc, I had the opportunity to actually sit down and talk with a former Cell press editor who explained to me some of the reasons to think about becoming a scientific editor. And she explained about 5 different major overarching reasons. Those who enjoy being a scientific editor have a broad level, you get a broad level view of a variety of scientific fields. You basically know a little about a lot. You get a sneak peek of the latest research before it's out. You get to travel to, and hopefully you get the opportunity to also organize conferences. You get to interact closely with researchers and be an advocate and help them communicate the most accessible science to the general population as possible. And you get to shape science through input on research articles, commissioning review articles on important subjects, and collaboration with the scientific community. So before you enter into a career as an editor, it's good to know that there are multiple types of editors that you could become. There's the primary research editor, which probably many of you interact with if you are publishing in any number of research journals, such as Cell, Nature, Science, and any of those sister journals associated with them. These primary research editors primarily evaluate data-driven research. Then there are reviews editors, such as myself, and Shankar and Matt, and we're going to evaluate the broader scientific landscape that's out there. And then there's also executive editors, and these editors help editor-in-chiefs of society or academic-run journals. And this role can range in responsibility from being anything administrative-like to being very involved in the peer review and editorial decision-making that would be similar to a job such as a reviews editor or primary research editor. So I'm going to focus primarily my talk on reviews editor for sake of time. So what's unique about so every reviews editor has an editor-in-chief, and some review journals will also have assistant editors and senior editors to help. So essentially a team of editors to evaluate manuscripts that come. Trends is a bit unique in that every trends journal is overseen by one editor. So if you were to become a trends editor, you are automatically the editor-in-chief of the journal, and therefore you handle all the responsibility of the journal. So that means you oversee the strategy of the journal, you take the time to identify field trends based on publications, performing analytics, looking at conferences, and networking with those in the field. You take the time to invite investigators to write on specific topics. We oversee the entire peer review process. So we choose the reviewers, as Matt had mentioned. We communicate those decisions. We also perform what's called developmental editing. Matt mentioned prior that you don't have to worry about grammar or copy editing. We actually will help authors provide an accessible manuscript to the community. We will focus primarily on organization and flow of the manuscript and making sure that the sentence structure is scientifically accurate and communicated well. We also perform a lot of networking. We are going to about 3 to 5 conferences a year and also attending webinars. We will visit labs and talk with scientists in the lab. We will also communicate with an academic advisory board that we have. And all of this is really there for us to try and better understand the fields of interest for those that we talk with, as well as a way for us to get input on ways that we can improve the publishing experience. We also have some fun jobs if you're creative. We can create the cover art for each journal issue every month. And as Shankar mentioned, we also have marketing and social media platforms that we use for outreach for scientists to disseminate their papers. In addition to the core tasks of an editor, trends editors also gain a lot of exposure to other areas of the company that can help them develop specific skills in people management and training, conference, webinar, and product development. You can actually oversee content, program content for conferences and webinars. You can have exposure to writing, such as editorials or blogs, and you can also experience working with other journals through crosswork, where you can actually gain experience working as a primary research editor, or vice versa for primary research editors to gain experience as reviews editors. So now that hopefully I've convinced you that being a scientific editor might be a potential career path for some of you, what is it that we look for in a scientific editor? And what is an ideal candidate? So an ideal candidate would have a wide breadth of scientific interest. We want that editor to be detail-oriented and have a lot of organizational skills. As you noticed from the previous slide, we handle a lot of different things. And so it's really important to keep track of all of that stuff and be organized. We do ask that you have fairly decent written and oral communication skills. That does not preclude you if you are not a native English speaker. We have plenty of editors whose first language is not English, but we do ask that you are able to at least provide an accessible and be able to communicate what it is that you want the authors to revise in an accessible way. And we have training programs when you come on that we would help you with being able to provide helpful communication and instructions to authors. I would say the biggest thing that is the biggest skill that you would want to have is time management. Again, going back to the previous slide where you saw all the things that we were tasked with, each of those things has a specific deadline that has to be met. And so we have deadlines looming daily, weekly, and monthly. And so it's really important to be able to manage your time and all those deadlines. It's also really important to be patient and adaptable as a reviews editor. As many of you know, writing a review can sometimes be the last thing on your priority list. And so it's really important for us to appreciate that and be empathetic towards that. And so we need to be able to adapt our plans in case reviews come in late, reviewers' comments come in late, authors request delays and such like that, and things like that. So what do you do to make your application sort of stand out as a new scientific editor? I think the one thing that everyone should do, regardless of the career path they want to take, is to network with people in those careers. So taking the step to network with editors, such as today, or meeting up with us at conferences, even cold emailing or cold calling us, just to get an inside scoop on what it is that we do, answer any questions that you may have, and it also gives us a name to think about when any future positions open up. You also want to expand your breadth of interest if you don't already do this, and that can be reading anything that comes in that piques your interest, attend talks outside of your expertise, get a sense for who's in the field and what's going on in various fields. Also gain developmental editing skills. Matt pointed out in his talk that you should take the time to evaluate manuscripts if you're a trainee and ask your PI if you can do that, and I would absolutely agree. You can also ask your PI to see if you can help edit manuscripts and edit grants, take a first stab at writing those papers if you're not already doing that. This really helps you gain an appreciation for how manuscripts should be structured and how they should be presented to be accessible. And then be prepared to discuss these skills in your interview. One of the things that we will ask is we'll give everyone a written test prior to any formal interview, in-person interview. And we will ask that, we will basically ask you questions that help us assess these qualities. And one thing that might seem obvious, but also is not always done, is write a cover letter that speaks to why you want to be an editor. We often will get cover letters that kind of reiterate what your postdoc experience was. And while it's great that you can perform single cell RNA sequencing, that doesn't really tell us why you want to be an editor. And so anything that sort of speaks to what it is that drew you to this profession would help sort of bump you to the top of the list. So you might be thinking, okay, well, I want to jump in and I want to become a reviews editor, but what if I don't like it? What do I do? Is there a chance for me to transfer these skills anywhere else? And the answer is yes. There are a lot of skills that you will learn as a reviews editor that can be transferred to numerous career paths within academia and even outside of academia. You will learn project management, you will become adept at writing, editing. You will even learn marketing and sales techniques and gain a sense of business acumen, which I think is something that you won't really necessarily be exposed to regularly in academia. You can be involved in conference organization. You will become an expert in assessing the landscape of science, and you'll have a large and robust scientific network that I think is invaluable to a lot of employers. And if you have the opportunity, you can also become a people manager, and therefore you'll be able to manage teams and learn how to build a skill set to manage teams. And so a lot of our previous trends editors who have moved on to either other aspects in publishing, becoming either publishers or moving on to research journals. We've had people go back to academia, either as a postdoc, a PI, or a program director. We've had numerous other people go on to become program directors in industry and nonprofits and government. Those in nonprofits have actually gone on to help with advocacy and education. Some have moved on to careers in freelance writing. We actually had a former editor become a fiction writer. It was her dream. So she actually did it and she's super successful now. And we have had several go into biotech and even patent law. So there is a lot of skills that you learn as a trends editor that can be transferred. But if you're really interested in becoming an editor, we are currently hiring for different roles, both in the the trends team as well as in the primary research journals. So I would encourage you to take a look at our site on Workday Jobs. But if you have any further questions, I'm happy to take them now, or feel free to contact me, Matt, or Shankar if you have any questions. And thank you.
This is so good, Danielle. So inspirational. Like so many interesting aspects of a career as an editor. It's great. Well, please, everyone, thanks. Help me to thank the presentations of the editors. You can use your clapping hands too in your Zoom if you can. Just for the interest of the time, I'm well aware that it's very late for Shankar, particularly in Amsterdam. So we can try to keep the questions very short for a few minutes. I'm sure many of you would have questions. Like, is there any student in the audience that would like to start with a question? Or a non-student? Meanwhile, maybe I can start with a question. Daniel, so I remember a workshop previously by the editor of Nature and Knowledge that he was giving us an example about how was the interview process of someone to become an editor in Nature and Knowledge. And he was mentioning that there were some tests. For example, the panel was giving them papers to review like in a 1 hour and give like an outcome. Like, do you have any interview question or challenge, or what would a person need to be trained for an interview for such a position?
Yeah, so I mean, the interview process is in some ways, I think, kind of standard. It's probably pretty similar across publishing groups, maybe with some differences based on the type of journal that you're applying for, but at Trends specifically, there typically is a standard phone interview just to sort of get a sense if you are the right fit, you have an interest in actually pursuing an editor career, and then you're given a written test. And the written test is probably going to be about 5 questions, talking about, basically getting a sense for, do you have a wide breadth of interest in that field? Are you aware of sort of what's going on in the field currently? Are you aware of who are making big strides in the field, who are experts in the field? There will also be a question about just the publishing landscape in general and what maybe their views are on it. There's no right or wrong answer for that, I would say. I mean, I think, publishing in general is transforming, I think, like every year. So again, that's just for us to be curious about. And then there is a developmental editing test where we would give you a manuscript and we would ask you to evaluate the manuscript and for basically provide any comments that you might want to provide to the author to improve the manuscript, as well as a decision letter for what you would ask the authors to do in revision. For primary research journals, it's a similar process, but they might also be asked to evaluate various articles that have been published in the journal and discuss whether or not they should have made the cut, or basically what were their favorite articles and why, and what were their least favorite articles and why.
Incredible.
Can I add one thing, Danielle?
Yeah.
I think one thing that we really like seeing is candidates who have a strong grasp of what they think the scope of their journal is. We're not going to ask for like a full-blown journal strategy, but what kinds of articles do you think your journal should publish? And sometimes we get people saying, okay, well, this is what it has published in the past, which is good because it's shown that you're familiar with the journal at least. But we really like it when people can say, okay, this is what I think is in the scope, and here's why, and here's something I don't think is in the scope, and here's why.
It's also not beneficial to reiterate articles that have just recently been published in the journal.
Nicholas, do you want to ask the next question?
I thought Aideen was first, but I'm happy to.
You asked me to let you go first.
All right. Okay, so I have a question, actually, all three of you, about the flood of invitations by other publishers such as MDPI or Frontiers. So you said it doesn't matter so much if there's already a review out there, but on the other hand, you want to be novel and you want to have the cited review. So how do you deal with this, especially since that happens like on a daily basis? These invitations, I mean. Sorry.
Sure. I think maybe as editors, we don't necessarily see that side of it. So I'm not sure what other journals are asking of our authors. I will say that what we as Trends pride ourselves on is being sort of a, I don't know, like a boutique journal. I'm not sure that's the right way to put it, but it's more of a opportunity for editors to really share a voice and really give their perspective. And I think that's the one thing that we really pitch up authors on, saying, okay, well, it's not just you're summarizing the field, but you're saying what you think about the field. And I think that's one thing that we, at least in my opinion, do a lot better than some other reviews.
Okay.
And if I could ask a question to the editors, and maybe Shankar also could have like a good answer. So I see that the geographical location of the offices is very diverse. So like, what determines if one office is going to be in Amsterdam or Philadelphia or in Boston?
Sorry, can you say that again? What was the?
Like as an editor of Trends,
Yeah.
What is the geographical factor where the editor is going to be based?
Factor in the sense of, no, I don't know. What do you mean by factor?
I mean, like to be an editor of cancer, like, is it like the office set up in Philadelphia by default, or do you choose where the office is going to be?
No, I mean, now, so essentially, I'm set up in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, and now we're expanding a lot more. But so the Trends editors are basically located in different places. It's not just the US. We're also located in the UK, in London, in Oxford. We're also located in Amsterdam now. And so no, there's no specific location that goes with the editor of a particular journal.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
That is great. Aideen, did you want to ask your last question quickly?
Yeah, please, if I could. Firstly, thank you, all three of you. Those talks were excellent. We really appreciate you doing them, especially at an ungodly hour of the morning, Shankar. Thank you for that. I was going to say, so I haven't reviewed for Trends, but I have reviewed for other journals, and particularly early in my career, I get the articles that higher up people have declined to review, and then they end up coming to more junior researchers to review. And so I got a lot of articles that were written not particularly well. And so I gave, in my early infancy, a lot of feedback, editorial kind of feedback, I suppose. But it was mainly because I didn't actually necessarily understand what the authors were trying to get at in some of those instances. So can you give advice for, give recommendations for early mid-career researchers on when to say, I can't review this article in its current state? And I know that's not necessarily something you want us to do, but just permission, I suppose, to try, because I know you're going to fix it before it goes to publication, but that doesn't necessarily help us understand it at that point.
Maybe I can start, and then if Daniel or Shankar, if you want to add anything, feel free to. I think exactly what you said. I think if you read the draft and you do not know what the author is trying to say, I think that's a key sort of branch point in your decision about how to handle the manuscript. And I think if you come back and tell the editor that, I think we'll be pretty sympathetic. We might ask the authors to polish up the language, or consult a native speaker or something like that before they resubmit. Yeah, I think you identify an important point, though, is that we're dealing with the authors in like a proposal or an invitation kind of stage. So we have an idea of what we want the manuscript to be about, but we don't necessarily know exactly what it's going to look like by the time it gets to submission. So I think if you read through it and you genuinely just cannot tell what the point of the manuscript is, I think if the language is just not at a state where it's even reviewable, I think just let us know.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo everything that Matt said. I mean, hopefully, at least at Trends, we do evaluate the manuscripts before we send them out, that if they are in such a state that even we as editors cannot comprehend the main point, we would usually go back to the authors and ask them to revise and provide them with suggestions for revision. But yeah, I would say exactly what Matt said, let us know. In those, we do offer a box, at least in Trends, where it says comments to the editors, and you can be quite frank with us there. They won't be shared with the author. And so I think that's a great place for you to go and say, I can't follow the logic of this manuscript, and therefore I haven't really been able to provide anything constructive. And that's fine.
I think just very quickly, one of the things about, for example, in microbiology, when we get tons of papers, it basically is virology, bacterial. It's a lot of different fields. So essentially, we also have to be in the position to understand the basics of it. So we do read it, and if like Danielle said, before we send it out for review, we do actually evaluate the manuscripts. And if it is not in an easy to understand and easy to follow manner, then we definitely reach out. But of course, obviously, like both of them said, reach out and let us know.
Thank you.
That sounds great, everyone. So for the interest of the time, so let's close down the first hour of the workshop and go for the speed dating events. So thank you, everyone. And it was a pleasure to have everybody here.